Thanks, Riza, very much. Thank you, Ryan and Riza, for inviting me here. It's an honor, and I'm glad you guys are have this meeting going. It's good to know you're out there. My name is Steve, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is May 26, 2004, and I'm very grateful for that fact. So I'm here to talk about our foundation meeting, and if any of you haven't heard that before, you're wondering what that's about, if you don't know what primary purpose is about, that's why we do this. So we want people to, who are new to AA, and not just new to AA, maybe you've been around for a while and you're kind of looking for something different. And maybe that's why you found Primary Purpose Group. That was certainly my story. But regardless, we want to talk about the basics. We want to talk about, what does it mean to be an alcoholic? What is alcoholism? We're going to talk a little bit about solution, and then what do we do? So that's what we're here for. And again, thanks for inviting me here. So the foundation meeting is our need to know information, like I was saying, and I want to highlight something too, that I'm going to be using this outline, and this is an outline that we put together. I can't really take any credit for it, but Primary Purpose Group in Austin put this together, and it's really useful. My name in this meeting is my email address, so if any of you want this information, feel free to reach out. I also have my own Google Drive with lots of other useful step information, et cetera, if you're interested. And I forgot to mention, my home group is the Primary Purpose Group in Austin, Texas. And I actually have two home groups. I also have a local, I live in Bastrop, which is outside of Austin, and I have a local home group, the Phelan Road Group as well. So that's me. All right. So a little bit about AA, and thanks again to Paul, who talked about the sixth tradition. That was really helpful and insightful. And the singleness of purpose that he touched on is something that's important for us to talk about here. We're all here, and it's an open meeting, I believe. And so you don't have to be an alcoholic to be here. You can be a drug addict. You can just be someone who's supporting or someone that's just interested in this information, whatever your reason, you're all welcome. But the thing that we focus on in AA is the singleness, what we call the singleness of purpose. And what does that mean? It means that we talk about what we have in common, and we talk about alcohol. We talk about our problems with it. We talk about the solution. If you're here and you're a drug addict, that's okay. Something that we tell people is to just change the words if you need to. And there's other fellowships that you can get help from, but if it's an open meeting, you're welcome and wanted here. All right, anonymity. So, it's called Alcoholics Anonymous for a reason. Some of us don't want the world to know that we're alcoholics, and some of us might have important positions or be famous or whatever. And so it's important that we protect everyone's anonymity. I put my full name. I'm okay with people knowing who I am, but you have a right to your privacy and a right to not have that information. And it's not just your name, but it's also what you hear in meetings. It's important that we stick to that as well. All right, so what's different about Primary Purpose Group? There's all different kinds of meetings out there. The fourth tradition, we're autonomous. We can have, just about any kind of a meeting you can imagine, even ones that violate our traditions. But there's a lot of discussion meetings. There's big book study meetings, all kinds of literature study meetings. What's different about Primary Purpose Group is we study the big book. If you've experienced it, but if you haven't, we really take our time with it. We study it line by line. We have this helpful workbook. What's the purpose of that? It takes statements and turns them into questions. Why do we do that? It's so that when I'm studying, the purpose of this group is to study the big book. It's to learn everything we can about it so that we can understand how we can recover, and how we can help others. So by taking every statement and turning it into a question, it gets my brain to think about it in a different way. It gets us to look at it from an entirely different angle. And that helps us understand it. And it also is useful for me personally. When I read something, I can ask myself, does this apply to me? And yeah, so that's it. And, as you may have experienced, if you've attended any of these meetings, it takes us a long time to get through the book. We take our time with it. And we focus on the basic text, and that's the doctor's opinion to, page 164. And then we also cover, Dr. Bob's story. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And now we're going to get into what alcoholism is. A lot of people come in, I came into my first AA meeting, and I think probably in my first meeting, I said I was an alcoholic. I had no idea what it meant. And it's also, even if you've been sober for a while, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of what that means. That was certainly my case. So if we go to page 30 and more about alcoholism, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we're alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. Okay, that's the first step. Great. I admitted I'm an alcoholic. I still don't know what it means. And that's what we're going to talk about. So what does alcoholism not mean? It's or let me reword that. It's we'd like to, we hear these drunkalogs, we hear all these stories, we're familiar, we've all had consequences, otherwise we wouldn't be here. It's not about what's happened. It's not about, whether you've been in jail, whether you've been living on the streets, whether you've had DUIs, whether you've, done all kinds of things. We've all done a lot of those things, but that's not what makes us alcoholic. It's not about those circumstances, and it's not about the consequences. It's not about you're a good person or you're a bad person. You could be either, but it's about what alcohol does to you when you take it into your system. All right. On the same page we were just on, page 30, we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we're regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We're convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. Okay, so that's starting to paint the picture. If I'm an alcoholic, I have no control. And it says right here, again, real alcoholic doesn't ever regain control. So I may think that I have control, and we'll get to that, but I don't. Something that, there's this part in the beginning of the book. I don't know if I even knew this was here when I first got sober. I think and I certainly didn't really connect with it until primary purpose group, at least not in the way that I understand it now. The doctor's opinion, and it's in the Roman numeral part of the book. In the beginning, Dr. Silkworth was the director of Towns Hospital at the time that Bill got sober. And that was a treatment center for drug and alcohol addiction. And this was very early days. I don't know if it was the first of its kind, but it might have been one of the first of its kind to actually try to treat alcoholics and addicts. Dr. Silkworth had a unique insight that this is an illness. Before that time, and it's still true even now, out of ignorance, is that a lot of people do think it's something moral. They think, you drink because there's something wrong with you. And why don't you just stop and be normal like everyone else? Why don't you stop destroying yourself and hurting other people? His insight and where he helps us is to say that this is an illness. And he refers to it as an allergy. So if you go to Roman numeral 28, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Okay, we're used to hearing the word allergy nowadays. Everyone's got allergies, hay fever, whatever. In those days, that was a pretty new term. It wasn't very widely used or understood. And what does that word mean? It just means an abnormal reaction. So when I take alcohol into my body, something, I have an abnormal reaction. I don't react like normal people. It's not the same as other types of allergies that I'm going to break out in hives and my throat's going to close up. But we know that it affects us in a different way. And that's what I'm going to explain a little bit more here. So I know that when I physically take it into my body, something strange happens. I have a strange reaction. So what's the solution? If I have a strawberry allergy, and just like I described, I break out in hives or I start to, not be able to breathe, what would I do? I would stop eating strawberries. If we go to page 30 in the doctor's opinion, he tells us the solution, part of the solution. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. Okay. If I'm not an alcoholic and I'm drinking heavily and it's becoming a problem, then that's the solution. I just stop drinking. That's pretty simple. However, if you are an alcoholic, if you're a real alcoholic like me, that's not going to quite do it. All right. So the other thing that Dr. Silkworth helped us understand is how, I talked about the allergy. That's how it affects me physically. And it leads to what we call this phenomenon of craving. So I'm sure as many of you have experienced, I know that I have, you take one drink and that's not enough. And it's just never enough. Even if something forces you to limit your drinking, you want more and more and more. So that's the phenomenon of craving. That's part of the physical aspect of this disease. The other aspect is the mental. If we go to page 22, and again, this is in notes, so if you're not following, that's okay. This is at the bottom, we're equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink. Well, we'll get to that in a little bit. So there's this mental obsession. Once if I'm not drinking, and we're going to get into what happens when I'm dry, but I'm obsessing about it. So it affects me mentally, physically. And the problem is, for me, if I'm dry for a while, and this is definitely my case before I got to AA, and I realized, I had horrible consequences of my drinking. I knew I needed to stop. I was threatened to stop. So I did my best to stop on my own. And what happens? I went for a while. I could maybe get it, a few days, maybe a little bit more, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a few weeks. But at some point I start to, just have this voice saying, well, you've been sober for a while, and maybe you can just have a beer. It's not a big deal. It's not hard alcohol, whatever it is. It's telling me something. And as my sponsor, Chad, likes to say, that voice is talking to me. It's my voice. So I think it's just me. I think it's something that's, seemingly innocent. It's very subtle at times. And so that leads me to think that I have a choice. Well, something that we've come to understand about alcoholics is we don't have that choice. And on page 24, it highlights that. It's in the squiggly writing, the italics. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. Okay, so we start to understand. I think that I have some kind of power. I have a power to choose, but I don't. I really don't. And my experience has proven that over and over again. All right, so let's go back to, yeah. Oh, sorry. Back to the mental obsession. On page 30, again, this is in the first paragraph. The idea that somehow someday he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. So that's what's waiting for me. And that's how this shows up in my life. I'm obsessing about it, and I'm obsessing about the ability to control it. I think this time will be different. The evidence doesn't bear that out, but I think somehow this time is going to be different. Okay, so on page 37, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? So I'm insane. This, and that's what the doctor helps us with as well, that this is primarily a mental disease. We don't have the ability to choose. We don't have the ability to control. What this book tells me, and what we need to understand, what I need to understand if I have any hope, is that I can't control it and I can't stop once I've started. And the book refers to this as being beyond human aid. So I can't keep myself sober. I can't keep you sober. I have no power when it comes to that. All right, so that's insanity. Now I want to get into the spiritual, what we call the spiritual malady, the spiritual aspect of this illness. If we go back to the doctor's opinion, Roman numeral 28, at the bottom, they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. So, and I'm going to get into the terrible cycle here in a second, but what happens is, I stop drinking because of the consequences, because I have remorse, because I feel terrible for what happened. As soon as I'm separated from alcohol, as soon as it's out of my system, I'm technically sober. I would say I'm dry. But it's, let's get into the terrible cycle here. So to continue in that paragraph, after they've succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. All right, I'm gonna share my screen here. Bear with me. All right, can you guys see that? Thumbs up? Yep, awesome. All right, so my sponsor Chad drew this and did a great job, and it's just a visual way to see what that paragraph that I just read. What does this mean? If alcohol is my problem, then stopping drinking is the solution. That should be simple. What I didn't understand for many years, and what this program, actually understanding this book has helped me, Primary Purpose Group helped me understand, is alcohol wasn't my problem, it's my solution. So I drink because of what's described in this cycle. So what happens? Let's start with that first drink. So I take that first drink. Okay, that leads to the craving. So physically, again, that drink isn't enough. I want more and more and more, and I drink until terrible things happen. That's my experience. And that's what we call a spree. That's what we call, and that leads to consequences. For me, waking up, not knowing how I got to where I am, blacking out almost every time I drank, lots of things, laying down, face down and full of my own vomit, you name it, all kinds of consequences, and that many of us have experienced. Do I feel good about those consequences? No, personally, I don't. When I'm drinking, I don't seem to have much of a conscience. When I come to, I definitely do. So I'm remorseful. I feel terrible. And some part of me says, I don't ever want to go through that again. I need to stop. So that's what we call a firm resolution to stop. and there may be some outside influences telling me to stop, or encouraging me, or heavily encouraging me, or threatening me. Okay, so I stopped drinking. And like I was describing, okay, the alcohol leaves my system. I'm dry. I'm technically maybe sober. And this leads to that restless, irritable, discontented. And that's what we call the spiritual malady. What does that mean? And I'm sure many of you have experienced it. I know I have, and you can also experience this in sobriety, which is kind of the point here. But basically, I don't feel right. I feel I'm irritable. Everything is bothering me. I'm not okay with anything that people are doing around me. They're making bad decisions. They're not doing it the way I think it should be done. They're, Chad talks about, they're not driving right. They're driving too fast or too slow. Whatever it is, it's not right. It's not okay. I feel uncomfortable in my own skin. It's just that. And I'm a mess. I'm discontented. I'm not happy. Nothing is good enough. Nothing is enough. Maybe alcohol is not in my system. Okay, I'm dry. I'm sober right now. But I want to fill that with something. And so I'm feeling pretty desperate. What does that lead to? That leads to the obsession. That's when that voice that I was referring to earlier starts to come up and say, yeah, you had some bad experiences, but just drink beer, or just have one and it's probably okay. Or, you know what, you're on a business trip and your wife is nowhere around to stop you and no one else is there to stop you. Why don't you just have one drink with your friends? What's the worst that could happen? Well, it's pretty freaking bad. But and we succumb. And again, we think we made that choice. My experience has shown it's not a choice. It's going to happen if you're an alcoholic. If you're not, another way to illustrate it, if you stop drinking and your life is just great, and no issues, and then you might not be an alcoholic. You're probably not an alcoholic. If you stop drinking, and or I think for just about anybody, after a certain amount of time, you're going to feel good because it's physically out of your system, and you're going to feel a little bit more healthy. Maybe you're going to sleep better. That could be short-lived. And if you're an alcoholic, that terrible cycle is going to come into play without a solution. And again, like Chad says, I'm not trying to convince you that you have a problem. If you're here, it's most likely because you have a problem. What you need to understand, what I need to understand, is I don't have a solution. I don't have a way to solve that problem. The other thing I want to highlight is, maybe you've gone to a lot of meetings, maybe you've read this book, maybe you've been exposed to a lot of good information. So we call that knowledge, we call that self-knowledge, and it's really helpful. It's good. It's good for me to understand the nature of alcoholism. What does that mean? So I'm good, right? Nope. It's not enough. It's really helpful, and we want you to have as much of that information. I want to get as much information as I can to understand myself, to understand alcoholism, how it works. But that knowledge isn't going to keep me sober. It's just going to give me that information. There's still something missing. Let's go to page 39. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers, as it has been a bitter experience. So they're really trying to get that across, and they did with some great examples and stories. On page 24, with me. At the bottom, when this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. These dark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop, but cannot. All right. So again, what it said on the previous page, I've placed myself beyond human aid. And again, we also talk about alcoholism as an illness, and it's, I haven't highlighted yet, it's our understanding is it's a progressive illness. Maybe when you first started drinking, you could control it to some extent. But for all of us, as I understand it, we pass beyond this point of no return. We drink enough that we can no longer control it, and it's hard to say exactly when it is for some of us, but that's our understanding. And when I've crossed that threshold, I'm beyond human aid. So what I've been trying to emphasize so far in terms of what this does to us is the hopelessness. Again, nothing can help me. So where do I go from here? What happens? And that's where we get to the solution. What is the solution? Back in the doctor's opinion, he described it as an entire psychic change. What we refer to that as a spiritual awakening. And if you're coming in here and you're agnostic or atheist, that was actually my case. I'd rebelled against God. And again, my understanding is about 50%. It's 50-50 in our organization in terms of people who are in terms of people who are agnostic, atheist, or religious. And as far as I understand, that was true in Bill and Bob's day as well. Bill was an agnostic, and Dr. Bob was religious. So we can come in here from either background. The reality is it doesn't matter. And you may hear the term spiritual awakening, and that may not be great news to you. But the reality is, whether you believe in God, don't believe in God, it really makes no difference. You can have a spiritual experience if you take these steps. So in We Agnostics on page 44, starts with a couple of things. The first is one of my favorite descriptions of what it means to be an alcoholic. It kind of sums up very succinctly. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only spiritual experience will conquer. So that's our understanding, that the only way to treat this is by having this spiritual experience. On the next page over, lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. So what have we established so far? I can't solve my problems. Whether I believe in God, don't believe in God, either way, I still can't stay sober. Whatever religious ideas I may have clearly aren't doing it. And if I'm agnostic and I don't believe in something like that, then I'm not the supreme being that I thought I was. I don't have, alcohol has shown me that I can't control it. It's proven to me that I'm not God, because if I was, I could just snap my fingers and be sober, and that would be great. You guys started this, meeting reading the forward to the first edition, and going back to that page, Roman numeral 8, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. I don't know if that's so. That's what this book is for. It's to connect me to a higher power. Again, if that's doesn't sound like a great idea to you, if you're not happy about, okay, there's a spiritual, and that's something too, we talk about sometimes things are misrepresented in meetings, and I've heard in meetings, and maybe I've even said it in the past, well, that's the spiritual part of this program. the entire program is spiritual, whether I like it or not. That's the case. On page 46, it says, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. So that's also to me, revolutionary idea in AA, that you don't have to believe in the God that was taught to you at church growing up or church now or whatever. It's your own conception that you connect just whatever you can connect with. And the good news is it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it figured out. On page 47, we need to ask ourselves but one short question: do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. So I just have to be willing to believe. Well, if alcohol has proven to me that I'm beat, I can't do it. Is there some power out there? Do I need evidence of that power? Well, if nothing else, the Fellowship of AA can show you that. If people have been able to stay sober and lead happy and productive lives, that's some evidence right there. So someone has been able to connect to something. Maybe that's enough to get started. All right. The other part I want to highlight is, it's what it says in our 12th step, that having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So again, if I take these steps, and that is the main purpose, that's what we're here for. That's what this is going to do, is to help connect me to a higher power. That's the only hope I have as an alcoholic. So that's the solution. The work that we have to do, what I discussed is primarily talking about steps 1 and 2. The program of action, as we talk about it, is 63 to 84, and that's the action. What do I do? Okay, I've understand the nature of this illness. I've understood that there is a solution. Where do I go from here? Well, get a sponsor. And if you're here, if you're brand new, obviously you need to get a sponsor and have them take you through this work, have them take you through the steps. But if you've been around for a while and are looking for a new experience, something that I've been, blessed to experience, I found a primary purpose group at 13 years sober. Something that, I haven't touched on too much is untreated alcoholism. And that relates exactly to that terrible cycle, that restless, irritable, and discontent. The benefits of sobriety, the benefits of recovering, can lead to a lot of good things in life. You can get your job back, you can get relationships, you can get all kinds of things. What you don't necessarily hear, or at least I didn't, or at least if I did, it didn't sink in, is those things can make you think that you're good. It's kind of like someone who's on medication for mental illness and feels better, so they stop taking their medication. The same thing can happen to us. I've outlined, briefly what the solution is to have that spiritual experience. If I feel like, okay, I've had it, I feel good, I've gone through the steps, I'm working with others, I can, and again, things are coming back to me in life. I can feel like I'm okay now. Okay, thanks God, you got me this far. I'll do what I need to do to just maintain the sobriety. But we can kind of lose sight. We can rest on our laurels. We can drift. And the same thing that I described in that terrible cycle is what's going to happen to me in recovery. And I'm going to be in untreated alcoholism because I'm not drinking, because we know that alcohol can be a solution to this illness is to drink. I'm not drinking any longer, so I'm dry. But if I'm not feeling connected, if I'm not having a spiritual experience for me on a daily basis, something is missing, and I'm not treating my alcoholism. So we call that untreated alcoholism, and that can happen to any of us at any time. And that's what happened to me for probably almost solid 10 years, and it wasn't pretty. But at 13 years sober, I found Primary Purpose Group, and that showed me, and my sponsor had passed away, and I realized that I needed help. And God brought me to Primary Purpose Group in Austin and showed me a different way of looking at this program. The way we studied the book did open different parts of my brain, gave me a different perspective, helped me realize that there was more information here than I realized. I loved, when I first came in touch with this big book or an early sobriety, I fell in love with it. But somehow I drifted, and Primary Purpose Group taught me to fall in love with it again and get this information that's so vital for me. So if you've been around for a while, you've been sober, but you're feeling like maybe there's something more to experience, and you don't even have to change sponsors. You can ask someone who's, kind of living in this a little more directly, and to take you through. And I've done that for people. I've taken them through without necessarily being their sponsor. But if you're new here, get a sponsor. What is a sponsor? It's just someone to take you through these steps, to take you through the book. That's it. What else is important? Unity. Go to meetings. Get a home group. So get a place that you feel like you belong, that people get to know you, that you get to know them, that you connect with. For me personally, that's, that happens more easily in person, but however it works for you, just find somewhere you're gonna get involved. Service work, get a service position. For me personally, getting service, getting involved in service early on saved me. That was a way that I had some reason to show up to be at that meeting. But it's easy to also think that service is means that you don't have to do your recovery work, but you do. Something that Katie says that stay in the herd, stay in the middle of the herd. If you look at a herd of animals, the ones on the outside are the ones that get picked off. So I want to stay in the middle of this thing. So I need to stay involved. I need to connect with people, try to connect with people on a daily basis. So those three things: recovery, unity, service. That's on our coins and our chips, and that's how we keep this thing going. Let's talk about a promise. So if you've been to AA meetings before, you've definitely heard the 9-step promises, but something that's not shared as much is the 10-step promises. So on page 84 at the bottom, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We act sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So that's what's waiting for you. If you haven't experienced that yet. If you have experienced that, please share it with others. And thanks again for this opportunity to be of service. I'm really grateful, and thank you, everyone.